The last thing my son said before the door closed wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was worse than that. He looked at me and said, "Dad, I can't live with this." Then my daughter, the same girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during fireworks, said very clearly, "You let us believe a lie." That's when I knew this wasn't about an argument. This was about something that couldn't be taken back. The room still looked like a celebration that hadn't been cleaned up yet. Half-full glasses on the table. A birthday cake leaning in the middle, candles burned down to nothing. Wrapping paper torn open and left on the floor like it didn't matter anymore. I stood there with my hands hanging useless at my sides, trying to understand how a few sentences could erase a whole lifetime of being dad. If you've never carried something heavy for decades, it's hard to explain what it does to you. After a while, you stop thinking of it as a secret. It just becomes part of how you stand, how you breathe. That's why I didn't go after them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move. I watched my wife quietly pick up her coat. No anger. No scene. Just the calm of someone who has reached the end of a road without realizing it until now. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To be with our kids," she said. Her voice didn't shake. I wish it had. When the door closed behind her, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt final. My living room, the place I thought I understood better than anywhere else, suddenly felt like a room where every word I'd ever spoken was being replayed out loud. So let me back up. Because you don't end up standing alone on your 60th birthday by accident. And before you decide what kind of man I am, you should know this. I didn't wake up that morning planning to tear my family apart. I woke up thinking I'd done a decent job with my life. I woke up a little after 5, the way I always do. Old habits don't retire just because you do. The house was dark and quiet, winter pressing against the windows. I went into the kitchen, started the coffee, and stood there staring at the calendar like it might say something new. 60. A number that makes you stop and take inventory. My father never reached it. Part of me thought that meant something. My phone buzzed before the sun came up. A message from my son, "Happy 60th, dinner tonight. Don't try to sneak out early." Then one from my daughter, a quick selfie with her coffee, "We're coming. Love you." My wife came in behind me wearing her robe, hair still messy in that familiar way I've known for 35 years. She wrapped her arms around me and rested her cheek against my back. Nothing dramatic, just real. The kind of touch that keeps a man steady without saying a word. "Birthday boy," she said. "You look like you're somewhere else." "Just thinking about tomorrow," I said. "Retirement feels strange." She turned me around, straightened my collar like she used to with my uniform, and said, "We'll figure it out. We always do." That line should have settled me. Instead, it landed heavy. Because there was one thing we had never figured out together. One thing I'd carried alone for 40 years. Even on a good morning, it waited in the background. When I reached for the sugar, the smell of coffee dragged up an old memory. A hospital cafeteria, bleach and cheap coffee, the kind of place where time feels frozen. I pushed it down like I always did. Not today, I told myself. Today is supposed to be easy. Around midday, I drove to the cemetery. I told myself it would only take a minute. I parked where I always did and walked the familiar path. 2 small markers side by side. No names you'd recognize. Just dates. Just proof. I knelt, brushed away a leaf, and said I was sorry. Not loudly. Not like a speech. Just enough to hear myself say it. Then I stood up, because standing has always felt like the only way to keep going. On the drive home, something settled in my chest. I realized I was out of time. I could keep protecting everyone from the truth. Let my kids keep loving a version of their story that wasn't complete. Or I could finally tell it and accept whatever came after. Either way, someone was going to get hurt. Knowing it might be them made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. By late afternoon, the house smelled like food and warmth. My wife moved through the kitchen with the quiet confidence that comes from doing the same thing for the same people for a long time. Music played low in the background. I watched her sway a little as she chopped vegetables and thought, this is what I could lose. "You've been quiet," she said. "Just tired," I answered. She stepped closer, touched my face, and said softly, "Don't disappear tonight. This is a good day." When the kids arrived, the house filled up in a way only family can manage. My son clapped me on the back. My daughter hugged me, and held on just a second longer than usual. I noticed the gray in my wife's hair, the fine lines around my children's eyes, and it hit me how time doesn't rush past. It piles up right in front of you. We ate. We laughed. The same old stories came out again. My daughter raised her glass and said, "To Dad, the man who always did the right thing." That was when my throat closed, because I knew I was about to prove that sentence wrong. I stood up with my glass like I'd done 100 times before. My wife smiled, expecting nothing more than another harmless toast. My kids looked relaxed. Safe. Inside me, two versions of myself argued quietly, the man who wanted one more peaceful night, and the man who was tired of living crooked. My hands stopped shaking. That scared me. "I need to tell you something," I said. They looked up at me, open and trusting. And in that moment, I could already see the room the way it would look later. Empty, quiet, the cake left behind like evidence of something that went bad. I could have sat back down. I could have let the candles burn out and carried the truth another year. But I didn't. Because sometimes telling the truth isn't about being forgiven. Sometimes it's just about not lying anymore. That's where it started. Right there, with my family smiling at me. And me about to ruin it. I didn't sleep that night. Not the kind of sleeplessness where you toss and turn. This was the kind where you lie still, eyes open, listening to the house breathe without you. Every small sound felt louder. The refrigerator clicking on, the heat kicking in, a floorboard settling. Things I'd lived with for years, suddenly acting like witnesses. At some point near morning, I realized I wasn't waiting for sleep. I was waiting for something else. For the phone to ring. For footsteps in the hall. For proof that the night before hadn't actually happened. It didn't come. I got up before the sun, same as always. Habit again. I shaved. Put on a clean shirt. Made coffee for one and poured too much, out of muscle memory. I stood there holding the mug, staring at the second chair at the table. That was the first time it really landed. This wasn't a fight. This was distance. And distance, once it settles in, is harder to cross than anger. You should know something about me before we go any further. I've never been good at talking about myself. I spent most of my life listening instead. Watching. Filling out reports, asking questions, keeping my voice level even when the room wasn't. That kind of work trains you to keep things contained. Useful skill on the job. Dangerous one at home. I met my wife when I was still figuring out who I wanted to be. She had a steadiness about her that made you feel like things would work out if you just stayed in the room long enough. We built a life the slow way, mortgage, dinners at the same table, routines that didn't look like much from the outside but held everything together. When the twins came, I thought I'd been handed something solid. A future you could point to. What I didn't tell anyone was that from the very start, there was a second life running alongside the one everyone could see. After breakfast, if you can call toast you don't taste breakfast, I went into the garage and sat in the car with the door open. Didn't turn the engine on. Just sat there. I thought about calling my son. Then my daughter. Then my wife. I picked up the phone, put it down, picked it up again. That's the choice I kept running into over and over again in my life. Speak now and risk everything, or stay quiet and carry it alone. I went to work instead. The station was quiet. A few familiar faces, a few nods. Someone said, "Big birthday, huh?" I smiled and said something polite. I've learned that most people don't actually want the real answer. They want confirmation that the world is still in the order they expect. I went into my office, closed the door, and sat down. The desk looked exactly the same as it had the day before. That almost made it worse. I pulled open the bottom drawer and took out the folder I hadn't touched in years. No names on the front. Just dates. I didn't open it right away. I ran my hand over the edge of it, the way you do when you're bracing yourself. I thought about the man I was at 29. Tired. Scared. Standing in a hospital corridor that smelled like disinfectant and bad news. People like to imagine that big decisions come with speeches or warnings. They don't. They come quietly, when you're already worn down. When my wife was in recovery, and I was alone with my thoughts, I heard a young woman down the hall arguing with a doctor. She was crying, saying she couldn't do it, that she wasn't ready, that she didn't want the babies. No one raised their voice. No one forced anything. Papers were signed. Systems moved the way systems do. I didn't step in thinking I was doing something noble. I stepped in because I was drowning and something floated past. I told myself I could give those children a good life. I told myself it was better than the alternative. And once I made that choice, I told myself I'd live with it. Fully. Quietly. Without dragging anyone else into it. And for decades I did. I went to every school event. I stayed up late helping with homework. I taught them how to drive, how to shake a hand, how to keep their word. I loved them the way a father does, not halfway, not out of obligation. Completely. But there was always that other place I went to alone. The small stones. The dates. The apology that never felt finished. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. Just one line. I don't know how to talk to you yet. I stared at it longer than I should have. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't silence either. And suddenly I understood that the truth doesn't end a story. It changes the shape of it. I left work as the sky was starting to darken and drove without thinking about where I was going. I ended up back at the house. The lights were off. My wife's car was gone. I stood on the porch longer than I needed to, keys in my hand, thinking about whether going inside meant accepting that this was my life now. Here's the part one didn't expect. I felt lighter. Not better. Lighter. Like something I'd been holding in finally put its own weight down. And that scared me, because it meant the lie had been costing me more than I admitted. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, I made another choice. I wasn't going to chase forgiveness. I wasn't going to argue my reasons. All I could do was stay available and live with whatever came next. I didn't know if that would be enough. And for the first time since this started, that question didn't let me breathe easy. The first time my wife spoke to me after the party, it wasn't face to face. It was a voicemail. No greeting, no call me back. Just her voice, tired and careful, like she was reading instructions on a bottle she didn't trust. I'm meeting the kids at your daughter's place, she said. Don't come. Not yet. Then a pause, the kind that tells you she had more to say but didn't know how. Please don't make this harder. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear like it was evidence. You know what's strange? I'd handled emergencies for most of my adult life, accidents, breakups, bad nights that turned into worse mornings. But nothing prepares you for your own house going quiet. Nothing trains you for the sound of your name, said like it's a problem. I had a choice right then. I could drive over anyway, show up on the porch like some desperate man in a movie, and force a conversation. Or I could do the one thing I'd always done when things got dangerous. Hold position, give people space, and wait for the right moment. Waiting felt cowardly. Showing up felt selfish. I hated that those were my options. So I waited. Around noon my son called. Not a dad call. A formal one. We need to talk, he said. No small talk, no noise in the background. I asked where. He named a diner off the highway, the kind with vinyl booths and weak coffee. Neutral ground. That's what it was. A place where no one had to be the host, and no one had to feel safe. When I walked in, they were already there, my son, my daughter, and my wife sitting between them like a referee who didn't want the job. My daughter's eyes were puffy, but her posture was straight. My son stared at the table like he could make it tell him something. My wife didn't reach for my hand. She didn't even look at it. I slid into the booth and kept my hands on the table where they could be seen. Old habit. Thank you for meeting me, I said. It sounded wrong the second it left my mouth. Too polite for what we were doing. My son went first. So what now? He asked. What are we supposed to do with what you said? I could have started with my reasons. I could have tried to explain the hospital, the paperwork, the panic. But I saw it on their faces. Reasons would sound like excuses. So I said the only honest thing. You don't have to do anything today. You can be angry. You can walk away. I'm not going to tell you it's fine. My daughter's voice came out smaller than I expected. Were we a replacement? That question hit harder than any accusation. Because the answer mattered. Not to my pride. To their sense of self. I shook my head. No. Never. I loved you because you were you. Not because I needed someone to fill a hole. My wife finally looked up. Her eyes weren't sharp. They were disappointed, which is worse. You let me build my whole life on something I didn't know, she said. You let me thank God for a miracle I didn't understand. I swallowed. I know. My son leaned in, jaw tight. Did you pay someone off? Here it was, the part that turns people cold. I kept my voice steady. There was a young woman who signed papers to give up her babies. I spoke to her. I asked her to keep it private. I didn't threaten her. I didn't force anything. I gave her money, yes. Not to buy children. To close a door that was already closing. My daughter flinched like I'd slapped the table. So you did buy it, she said. No, I said, and for the first time my voice rose a little. I caught it and lowered it again. I paid for silence. That's still wrong. I'm not pretending it isn't. My wife's hands were folded, so tight her knuckles were pale. Do you hear yourself? She asked. Silence. Doors. You talk like you're still on the job. She was right. I was talking like a man trying to control a scene. And that was the problem. This wasn't a case file. This was love. This was the people I'd spent decades protecting from the truth. I sat back and took a breath. Let me say it plain, I told them. I was scared. I was alone in that hallway. I made a decision I thought I could carry. And I did carry it. But I don't get to decide what it costs you. Nobody spoke for a moment. The waitress came by and asked if we wanted refills. We all shook our heads like kids caught doing something they shouldn't. My son finally said, "You went to their graves." I nodded. Every year. Sometimes more. My daughter stared at her hands. Mom didn't know. No, I said. She didn't. That's when my wife's eyes filled. Not with tears that fell, but with the kind that just sit there because you refuse to give them the satisfaction. I would have stayed with you, she said quietly. Even if it was ugly. But you didn't trust me with it. That was the sentence that broke me. Not the anger. Not the disgust. The idea that my silence had told her she wasn't my partner. That I'd loved her, but not enough to let her see me at my worst. I wanted to reach across the table. I didn't. I asked myself, right there, what I wanted more, relief from my guilt, or respect for their boundaries. The answer was simple. I kept my hands where they were. I'm sorry, I said. Not the kind you say to end a conversation. The kind you say because you don't have anything else. My son stood up first. He dropped a few bills on the table and didn't look at me. We need time, he said. My daughter hesitated, eyes wet. For a second I thought she might hug me. Then she stood too. I don't know who you are right now, she whispered. My wife slid out last. She paused beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn for years. She didn't touch me. Don't follow us, she said. Please. I watched them walk out together, my family moving as one unit with me left out of the picture. When the door closed, the diner felt too bright, too loud. I sat there alone until the waitress cleared the glasses. In the parking lot, I leaned against my car and stared at my reflection in the window. 60 years old, and I'd just been told I was a stranger. I could drive to the cemetery and beg forgiveness from stones that couldn't answer. Or I could go home and sit in the quiet I'd earned. I went home. That night I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, like I was back in training. I wrote one line at the top. What do you do when the people you love won't let you love them? I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I heard my own voice in my head, the one I'd used for 40 years to justify staying silent, protect them. But the truth was, the silence had protected me. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I carried a letter in my coat pocket for 3 weeks, and never found the nerve to hand it over. The corners bent, the paper went soft from being unfolded and stuffed back in, like it was getting tired before I did. Every time I touched it I had the same stupid hope. Maybe the right words could fix what my truth had broken. It started the morning I realized the silence in my house had become normal. At first you tell yourself it's temporary. Your wife is with the kids, emotions are high, everyone needs space. Then you catch yourself setting out 2 mugs instead of 1, or turning down the TV because you think you heard a car in the driveway. You're living on reflex, not reality. I tried calling once. I stared at my wife's name until my thumb hovered over it, like I was about to step off a ledge. Then I stopped. Not because I didn't miss her, but because I finally understood something about myself. When I feel guilty, my first move is to push. To control the outcome. That instinct has helped me on the job. At home, it was poison. So I made a different choice. I wrote. A real apology has no bargaining in it. No but. No clever framing. It's just a man at a table, telling the truth again, this time without a toast glass in his hand. I wrote to my son first. I told him I understood why he couldn't look at me. I told him I wasn't asking him to defend me. I told him the only honest thing I had was this. I love you, I raised you, and I'm sorry I took your history away from you. Then I wrote to my daughter. Hers was harder, because her question at the diner kept ringing in my ears. Were we a replacement? I wrote, slowly, that she wasn't a replacement for anything, that my love for her wasn't borrowed or secondhand, and that I still didn't earn the right to keep the wrong hidden. Last, I wrote to my wife. I didn't start with the hospital. I started with her. How she held my hand when my mother died. How she learned my coffee order before she learned my middle name. How she kept our home running when I came back from late shifts carrying the kind of silence I thought made me strong. I told her the truth I should have told her decades ago. I kept this from you because I was ashamed of the man I was that day, and I was afraid you'd never look at me the same. Then I wrote what happened, plain and clean. A young woman signed papers. The system moved. I stepped into the gap. I paid for silence afterward. I told my wife I wasn't proud of it, and I wasn't asking her to make it sound better. I told her I'd accept whatever she needed: distance, anger, divorce, time. I asked for one thing only: that she believe my love for our children was real, even if my choices were not. I didn't send the letters right away. I read them out loud to an empty kitchen, just to hear if they sounded like me, or like a man trying to win a case. Some lines I crossed out, some I rewrote 5 times. Between the writing and the waiting, life kept going in small, insulting ways. The trash still had to go out. The lawn still needed cutting. I'd catch myself buying my wife's favorite tea at the grocery store, and then standing there, holding the box, realizing no one was coming home to drink it. At work, I could still read a room, still keep my voice even, still do the job. But the second I pulled into my empty driveway, all that control fell apart. I'd sit in the car for an extra minute with the engine off, hands on the wheel, trying to talk myself into walking inside like it was normal. Some nights I ate standing at the counter, because sitting at the table felt like admitting something. One afternoon, after a long shift, I drove to the cemetery again. Not because stones forgive, because it was the only place I could speak without someone flinching. I sat on the cold grass and unfolded the letter to my wife. Halfway through, I looked at those 2 small markers and realized something that didn't excuse me, but it mattered. I had been grieving alone for 40 years, and I had called it protecting my family. The truth was, I was protecting my image as the dependable man, the guy who always handled things. Right there, I made the choice I should have made when I was 29. I chose to let myself be seen as flawed. I mailed the letters the next morning. For a while, nothing changed. No calls, no messages, just the ordinary world moving on without me. Then late one Friday evening, my phone buzzed. A text from my son. "Can we meet tomorrow?" Relief hit so sharp it almost felt like pain, and then came the panic. Meeting meant speaking. Speaking meant I could ruin the first small opening by trying too hard. That night I made another choice. I wouldn't go in trying to persuade them. I wouldn't bring a stack of explanations. I'd just show up as their father, the imperfect man who made a decision, lived with it, and finally stopped hiding behind it. The next morning I drove to the diner and arrived early. I ordered coffee and didn't touch it. When my son walked in, he looked older than he had a month ago. He slid into the booth and stared at the table. "I read your letter," he said. I nodded, afraid to speak. "I'm still mad," he said. "But you didn't have to tell us. You could have taken it to your grave." "I almost did," I admitted. He looked up, eyes tired, not hard. "Why now?" I could have given him a dozen answers. I gave him one. "Because I got tired of asking you to love a version of me that wasn't fully honest." He sat quiet, then said, "Mom isn't ready." "I know." He nodded once. "My sister isn't ready either. But she asked if you really went to those graves." "I did," I said. "Every year." He studied my face like he was trying to decide if I was still his father. Then he said, "She wants to see you. She wants to ask questions." My chest tightened. "Okay," I said. "Whenever she wants." He stood to leave, then paused. "This doesn't make it okay." "I know." He walked out. And for the first time since my birthday, I felt something I hadn't allowed: hope. Not the kind that pretends everything goes back to normal. A smaller kind. A careful kind. I went home and stared at my front door before I went inside. The house was still quiet. Still empty. But it didn't feel like a sentence anymore. That night, just before bed, my phone buzzed again. A message from my daughter. One line. "I want to talk. Alone. Tomorrow." And I realized my next choice wasn't about explaining the past. It was about whether I could sit in her pain without trying to save myself. The call came at 6:17 a.m., and for a second I couldn't move. I stared at the screen like it might bite. My daughter's name. A call, on the morning of my 61st birthday. 1 year to the day after I stood up with a glass in my hand and blew my own life apart. I let it ring twice, 3 times. That was my choice right there. Answer and risk hearing something I couldn't handle, or let it go and prove I still hadn't learned a thing. I picked up. "Hi," she said. Her voice was cautious, like she was walking on ice. "Dad, are you home?" "I am," I said. "I'm home." "We're coming over," she said. "Me and my brother. Just us. No surprises." I wanted to ask 100 questions. I asked one. "Okay. What time?" "An hour," she said. Then quieter. "Please don't make it heavy." After the call, I looked at the kitchen table where I'd eaten alone for months. I didn't feel happy. I felt awake, like a man who finally got his head above water. I cleaned the house because my hands needed something to do. Then I forced myself to sit down, because I knew this about me. When I'm scared, I start fixing and talking. Today, if my kids were stepping toward me, my job was not to push them faster. When the doorbell rang, my heart did something stupid and young. I opened the door and there they were, my son with his hands in his pockets, my daughter with her arms crossed like she needed the pressure to stay steady. "Happy birthday," my son said, almost under his breath. "Thanks," I said. "Come in." We sat in the living room, not at the table. That mattered. My daughter looked around like she was seeing the house for the first time. My son kept his eyes on the floor. My daughter spoke first. "I keep thinking about what you wrote," she said. "About us not being a replacement." I nodded. "Because you weren't." She swallowed. "Were you ever going to tell us?" I could have lied to make myself look better. I didn't. "I told myself I would when you were adults," I said. "Then I told myself it would hurt you too much. The truth is, I was protecting me." My son let out a breath. "Mom's been quiet," he said. "Not mad, exactly. Just gone." "I understand," I said. I gave her a reason. My daughter's eyes were wet but steady. "I went online," she admitted. "I tried to understand. I don't know what it was like back then." "It was messy," I said. "And I was messy." We talked for a long time. Not yelling. Just questions and answers that didn't taste good. My daughter asked about the cemetery, and I told her where it was. My son asked if I'd ever regretted raising them, and I looked him right in the eye. "Never," I said. "Not once." Something in my daughter's face loosened. She leaned forward and put her hand on my arm, briefly, like she was testing a new habit. My son stood and went to the window. "I hate what you did," he said, still looking away. "But you're still my dad. I can't erase 40 years. I didn't answer with a speech. I just nodded. "I'm here," I said. They left an hour later. At the door, my daughter hugged me tight, quick, real. "Don't disappear again," she whispered. "I won't," I said, and I meant it. After they drove away, relief hit me, and then fear, because I knew the hardest part wasn't my kids. It was my wife. After they drove away, I walked through the house touching things like I was checking they were real. The back of the couch, the frame of a family photo, the spot on the counter where my wife used to drop her keys. I almost texted her right then. One simple line, "They were here. It went okay. Come home." My thumb hovered over send, and I stopped. That message would have been for me, not for her. I deleted it and made myself sit in the quiet and take the win without trying to grab more. I even took the cake out of the fridge and cut a thin slice. Not because I wanted it, because it felt wrong to let the day pass without tasting anything. I ate standing up, staring out the window, and realized how fast a man can become a stranger in his own life. I didn't call her. I didn't show up. I waited. That was the new muscle I'd been trying to build, patience without control. That evening, headlights swept across my living room wall. A car door closed. Then a knock. When I opened the door, my wife stood on the porch holding a small paper bag from the bakery she used to like. Same eyes, same mouth, but her shoulders carried a weight I put there. "I heard they came," she said. "They did," I answered. "We talked." She nodded slowly. "I'm not here to celebrate," she said. "I'm here because I don't want hate to be the last thing between us." I stepped back to let her in, then stopped myself. Invite her in like nothing happened, or respect that we weren't those people anymore. I held the door open but didn't reach for her. "Come in," I said. "If you want." She walked past me and looked at the room like it belonged to someone else. "A year ago," she said, "I thought I'd lost my husband. Not to another woman. To something inside him I wasn't allowed to see." "You should have been allowed," I said. "I was wrong." She set the bag on the counter and finally looked at me. "I believe you love the kids," she said. "I also believe you didn't trust me. And that takes time to forgive." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to erase it." She was quiet, then exhaled. "I can't go back to the way we were," she said. "But I don't want to live without you either." It didn't feel like a happy ending. It felt like an offer to rebuild with scar tissue. "I'll take whatever you can give," I said. Slow. Honest. No more hiding. She nodded once. "We start with dinner," she said. "And with you not trying to fix everything in one night." We ate at the kitchen table with 2 plates for the first time in a year. There was space between us. We didn't pretend it wasn't there. We talked about simple things, the weather, my son's work, my daughter's stubbornness as a kid, and every so often we'd both go quiet, like we were learning a new language. But there was also something new. The truth, sitting there with us, not invited but finally acknowledged. Later, when she stood to leave, she paused by the door. "I'm not moving back today," she said. "Don't read that as punishment. Read it as me being careful." "I will," I said. She hesitated, then touched my hand, just the fingertips. "Happy birthday," she whispered. After she left, I didn't feel empty. I felt tired in a clean way, like after hard work. I watched the streetlights glow on the snow and thought about the man I'd been at 60, chasing control. And the man I was learning to be at 61. A man who tells the truth, then lives with it. I didn't get my old life back. I got something harder, and maybe better, a chance to be known. And yeah, I'm still learning how to live like that.